Then Pilate entered the headquarters again, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate replied, "I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests have handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not from this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here." Pilate asked him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." Pilate asked him, "What is truth?" After he had said this, he went out to the Jews again and told them, "I find no case against him." Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Well, before I begin the actual sermon, I just wanted to mention something historically that I've mentioned in Bible studies, but it's something for you to remember. We believe that the Gospels were written in a particular order. Most scholars believe that the Gospel of Mark was written first, the Gospels of Matthew and Luke roughly at the same time, not long afterwards. And then several decades later, maybe 3 decades or so later, came the Gospel of John. And in that time, something happened in terms of the identity of Christ followers, which was that, we know that Jesus was Jewish. And the first generation of Christ followers considered themselves to be Jewish, just a different sect of Judaism. They were Jews with a particular belief that not all other Jews held, okay? And we see this today, right? There are any number of groups who identify as Jewish, and yet their beliefs are not identical to one another. And what happened in this time was this increasing separation of the identity of Christ followers from their identity having been as being Jews. And so in the Gospel of John, it's the only gospel where you see references to the Jews as if they are a separate group. Okay, so you don't hear that word happening in the Gospels of Mark and Matthew and Luke. You don't hear that. And so as you get to the Good Friday, the Holy Week narratives of the crucifixion of Jesus, and you hear about the crowds crying out for Barabbas, or the crowds being willing to have Jesus crucified, okay, in Mark and Matthew and Luke, they are identified as the people or the crowds. And in John, they're identified as the Jews, because by that time, the identity of Christ followers had become separated from their Jewish heritage, okay? And so that's why you hear that language here that always makes me a little uncomfortable, okay, when I hear the Jews, as if that's, a separate group, as opposed to understanding us as being sharing a common tradition. So I just wanted to make that historical note about the linguistic difference that you hear in readings from the Gospel of John as opposed to from the other Gospels. It has to do with the historical time in which those Gospels were written and what had happened in the relationship between Christ followers and the rest of the Jewish community in the intervening several decades. So now we get on. All right, so, before I went into ministry, I used to travel a lot on business, and I went to different places. And so, there were certain places I loved going to some places in Europe. I've never been to the Far East, never been to Australia. Australia would probably be the thing. If someone said you can have a ticket anywhere in the world, I'd probably choose Australia. And one of the things I would want to see is a building that you all recognize. You don't have to have a caption to know where this is. Right, okay? Everyone recognizes the Sydney Opera House. Now, how many of you have been there? How many of you have actually seen the Sydney Opera House? Okay, so a couple of you have seen. I actually thought it was going to be more. There were only a couple people at the 9 o'clock people here. I actually thought it was going to be more people who have been there at some point in their lives. Now, how many of you have lived in a different country? Yes. Okay. All right, so some of you have lived in a different country. How many of you had to learn a different language in order to live in that country? Okay, some fewer, all right, but some of those. All right, so you understand the the differences, right? You understand the differences between visiting a country and living there. You understand what it takes to actually think like a resident of a country, all right? So, and you learn and many of you know what it means to have to learn another language to the point where you would be fluent in that language in the country in which you're living. And you know how much time that takes, how difficult it can be, all right? It's not easy. Like, I'm still a native Chicagoan, even though I've lived 2/3 of my life in New Jersey, all right? And the hardest linguistic things I had to deal with were, first of all, learning that pork roll existed and that it's called Taylor ham. I'm sorry. I am from North Jersey, okay? And the other thing that got beaten out of me was in Chicago, that thing over your head is a roof. Not a roof, it is a roof. And it took 2 years of college to have my friends tease that out of me until I finally changed my pronunciation just to stop getting teased over it. So I was bullied into saying roof rather than roof. But I'm talking about this because what we're seeing in this famous interrogation of Jesus by Pilate is a clash of cultures. It's a clash of understandings of where people are from. Because the thing about Pilate is to remember that Pilate is the Roman governor of the province of Judea. He is not Jewish. King Herod was Jewish. And yes, he was a vassal king who was beholden to the Roman Empire, but he was in fact a Jewish king. Pilate is simply a Roman who's been stationed in Judea, and this is not a posting you desired. All right, Judea is on the outskirts of the Roman Empire. It's considered to be a backwater. You ever see those movies where somebody who works for the government or something angers their boss, and their boss threatens them with being reassigned to some, random place out, I don't want to say it because no matter which place I say, one of you is from it and you'll be insulted, but, but where they say we're going to send you there, all right, being sent to be the governor of Judea was probably as much of a punishment as anything else for Pilate. So Pilate is sent there. He almost certainly is not happy about having been sent there. He is not from there. All right? And so when he asks Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answers, "Do you ask this on your own? Like, is this actually your question? Or are you responding to what other people have told you about me?" Because Pilate doesn't actually care about this. All he cares about is keeping peace in his province. He's the governor. He's responsible for making sure that everyone gets along, and he just knows that there is unrest and dissatisfaction among these people whom he's governing because of what they say Jesus is claiming. And they're phrasing it in the way that they are because what they want is for Jesus to be found guilty of treason. And by claiming to be a king when the only king is Caesar, they hope that the Romans will eliminate their problem for them by deciding that Jesus is traitorous against Caesar. So Jesus asks this question, and Pilate's just like, "Look, I'm not a Jew." He denies caring. All right, he's like, "I'm not a Jew. This is not my issue. It's your people's issue. It's your nation. Your folks handed you over to me." It's like, I don't even know what you've done. It's just a headache for him that he would like the headache to go away. All right, this is something, it happens to pastors in churches. You might have some people who don't get along with one another and you don't really care. You're just like, "Can you just please get along?" Or maybe you're a parent with more than one child and the siblings are fighting and you don't actually care what they're fighting about. You just want them to stop. All right, and this is kind of the attitude that Pilate is bringing to this. He has no interest in Jewish theology. And so Jesus answers by saying, "Look, my kingdom is not from this world." And Jesus is using this word. Now, the word is very similar to what you see between king and kingdom in English. Kingdom in Greek is this word basileia, and it refers to an area of dominion, an area of control. And that's just slightly broader of a definition than how we normally use the word kingdom. Normally, when we use the word kingdom, we're thinking of a nation with very precisely defined borders, okay? So the king is king over this area, not over that area, all right? The word basileia means that, and it also means something a little more amorphous. It's anywhere, any area, any region to which your dominion, your control applies. So it's a slightly broader definition than nation. And when Jesus gives this answer, Pilate doesn't really get it. All he has heard is the word basileia the way he understands it. And so he goes, oh, so you're a king? Which, by the way, in Greek, the word for that word translated as king is simply a basileus. Okay, so you have a basileia and a basileus who wrote rules over a basileia, okay? So it's the very same cognate as what you have in English with king and kingdom. So he goes, oh, so you're a basileus. Because his frame of reference is earthly. And he can only understand kingdom in terms of an earthly king. And so Jesus, this is why he says, well, you say I'm a king. I didn't claim the word basileus. I'm simply saying that I am of an area of dominion, an area of control that is not of this world. But Pilate translates these words into his understanding of the world because that is just what we do. Whenever we're exposed to something new, we immediately translate it into a framework that we understand. That's how it makes sense to us. So we always enter a new situation, and what we bring with us is the dominant framework that we are used to, and then we take what we experience and translate it into that framework. We translate frameworks into what we know. All right? And so, for instance, some of you are from England, and when an American goes there, the way they refer to it is they drive on the wrong side. Okay? They drive on the wrong side because we have a framework of how it is that you are supposed to be on the road, and we have to translate that, and so we say that. This need to translate frameworks is why so many people will actually misrepresent Buddhism in terms of saying that Buddha is a god. Buddhists don't actually claim that Buddha is a god. To a Buddhist, Buddha was a human being who achieved enlightenment. All right, he achieved an exalted state, but he's not actually a god. But the reason why we often presume that the Buddha is a god is because our framework for religion is that religion involves worshiping a god. And so if you have a religion, our natural question is, well, okay, who is your god? And when we hear a religion called Buddhism, we presume that their god must be Buddha, when they don't actually claim divinity for Buddha. And so our translations tend to signal our dominant way of thinking, and we move everything into it, which is the way you deal with something before you know it extremely well. Like when you're learning a new language, right? The first step is you are translating everything in your mind into your language. So like if you're speaking in a language that you're not fluent in, you form the thought in your brain, you make the sentence in your brain, you translate it into the other language, and then you speak it. And fluency is when you can sort of skip that step, and it just sort of comes out in the other language. But Pilate has never gotten to know his community, and so he's still immersed in his framework that he's used to from his earthly experience, and so this is why he can't understand Jesus' answer. And Jesus says, "For this I was born, to testify to the truth, and everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." And I wonder what your relationship is to that word truth. When you hear truth, is truth something that you simply believe, that truth is a proposition that's put out there and you decide whether you're going to believe it as true? Is it something that you simply accept? Or is it, as Jesus suggests in this statement, is the truth something deeper? Is it something that envelops you? Is it something that owns you? Is it something that dominates you completely naturally? You see, that word belongs isn't really in the Greek. They could have just translated it very literally and we would have understood it, because instead of saying everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice, the literal Greek is everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. Are you of the truth? Right? Just like I'm of Chicago. No matter how long I've lived here, I'm still of Chicago. Okay. Are you of the truth? If you're a native of Jesus' kingdom, you are of that realm where Christ's values reign. If you're of the truth, you simply hear it and recognize it, all right, in a way that natives do, but tourists do not. All right. Okay? It's such a different thing. I mean, you travel to places. I mean, I am not fluent in any other language. I know smatterings of a couple of them, but I'm not fluent in any other language. So if I go to a country where I know something of that language, I have to hear it, think about it, translate it, and then understand it. But if you are fluent, if you are of that place, it all just flows completely naturally. So my question really, when it comes to this realm of Christ's values, this realm where if you are of those values, of that truth, you simply hear it, are you a tourist or a resident? When it comes to the kingdom values, because the kingdom of Christ is an overlay on our society. All right, so we have our society, our values, the way our society works, and then there is the kingdom of Christ, the kingdom of Christ where Christ's values reign, Christ's values of love and diversity and inclusion and acceptance and compassion and generosity, all of those things that are what it means to be a part of the kingdom of God. A kingdom that is amongst us, and it's around us, and it's within us. And yet I think that most of the time, we're tourists. We're tourists there, and here's one of the ways you can tell. All right, so we've got Thanksgiving on Thursday, Christmas season coming, and everyone refers to it as a season of joy, a season of generosity, a season of compassion, right? Why is it just a season? It's a season that we go visit once a year, We go for a month and visit that season of things that really ought to be a part of who we are year-round, right? People are often tourists in that world of compassion. Every Tuesday there's still a crew from this church that goes to table and packs groceries every Tuesday. All right, and they've been doing it since COVID. And what happens almost every week is that as that program's become better known, there are corporations who have like a day of giving, that kind of thing, and they send a corporate team of volunteers. And most weeks there's a corporate team. And then what happens is we'll get a text message to everyone who normally goes, and that message from the coordinator of the group will say, well, we've got corporate volunteers on Tuesday, so y'all can hang back a little. And what he's saying is hang back a little, don't do all the work so that you leave some for them. Because they're coming to do a day of service in the community, and they need to feel like they've done something, so don't actually do it. Let them come and do the work. And then they come and they've got their corporate t-shirts on and they gather for a selfie that'll go in the corporate newsletter about the work they did. And it's good that they did that. There's nothing wrong with it. But what they were doing is they were tourists. They were tourists. Our folks who are there every week, they're residents. Okay? They live there. They understand the clients, they understand the culture, they understand everything that's going on because they're of that place. They're not just visiting. So that difference between being a tourist and being a resident will manifest itself in whether how you speak into the world with your life speaks the values of Christ fluently. Is it something that you have to think about where there's a decision in front of you and you have to consider whether or not that decision conforms to the values of Christ? Or does your life simply speak the values of Christ so fluently that it just flows from you? That the love flows from you, that the compassion flows from you, that the generosity flows from you, that the acceptance and inclusion and appreciation for the diversity of God's creation and humanity just flows from you. Because fluency is smooth. Fluency is automatic. Fluency doesn't require you to have a translation layer between the world that we live in our secular lives and the world of Christ's values. A resident just does it. And a tourist, as much as they may appreciate it, as much as they may like it, as much as they enjoy being there, the tourist never really gets it. Because you have this all the time. I hear people who talk about where they might want to retire. They go, well, I visited that place a number of times, but they still have to ask the question, but what's it like to live there? Because what it's like to live there is very different from what it's like to visit. So Pilate, he's just a tourist in Judea. He's a tourist when it comes to the kingdom. And so when Jesus says, anyone who belongs to the truth hears my voice, he goes, well, what's truth? He doesn't get it. He doesn't understand because this idea of values, whether it is Jewish values, Judeo-Christian values, values of Christ, whatever it is in terms of those morals, he doesn't get it. Because his world is the world of Caesar. So he doesn't understand and he doesn't care. Even when he says, I find no case against him, as much as that sounds like just an absolute acquittal of Jesus, actually when you read it, where Pilate's coming from is that he doesn't care. This is not his fight. All right? It's like, I find no case against him. It's about being disconnected from their squabble, disconnected from their concern, because he doesn't understand the culture, because the way you understand it, the way you go from being a tourist to a resident, the way you go from just learning about a language to being fluent in it, is you immerse yourself in it. And if you're going to become fluent in the values of Christ in your life, you have to immerse yourself in those values. Because that's the only way you get to fluency. Like, if you follow me online, occasionally I post, I have been going with Duolingo Spanish. I've got a great streak going. I am over 1,000 consecutive days of Spanish lessons on Duolingo. Don't even try to have a conversation with me, okay? All right? Because that 5 minutes a day, even for 1,000 days, it's not doing it. I'm learning words here and there, but no, okay? I'm not fluent because I'm not immersing myself in it, all right? So it can be 1,000 consecutive days of like 5 minutes a day of the lessons, but that doesn't stack up to what would happen if I just went to like Costa Rica for a month. Because the immersion is what would lead to the fluency. And so if we're going to stop being tourists in the world of Christ-like values and actually become fluent in those values, actually act like a resident of the kingdom where those values reign, then what we have to do is immerse ourselves in that world. And how do we do that? We immerse ourselves in the Word. We immerse ourselves in the values. We immerse ourselves in love. We immerse ourselves in compassion. We immerse ourselves in generosity. We immerse ourselves in that world until living in accord with kingdom values becomes automatic to us, because we're no longer tourists. We've taken up residence there. So my prayer is that as we enter this season where the whole world visits a world of generosity and compassion for 4 weeks, only to leave it come New Year's, that we would instead choose to take up residence there. Take up residence in those supposedly seasonal values of joy and love and generosity and compassion and hope. Take up residence so that next July feels like Christmas, because that has become a part of who we are. Let us be residents of the kingdom and not just tourists. Amen.